Hey everyone, what's up? It's your girl, Amanda the author, and thanks for stopping by for another video. On my channel, I do something called a writer's review, where I take a look at movies, TV shows, and other books and analyze it from a writer's perspective. So my recent videos, we're talking The Conjuring, There's Someone in Your House, Charmed, etc. can be found in my writer's review playlist. Today I'm doing something a little different. I'm talking about a broad spectrum of work to discuss, dissect, advise against the use of what I believe to be toxic tropes. Now, I'm not somebody who thinks that tropes should never be used. In fact, I think it's important that we do use tropes, especially as more and more diverse writers come onto the scene. It's important that we see these tropes reimagined and subverted, featuring diverse characters. We're talking BIPOC characters, LGBTQ+ characters, differently abled, neurodivergent, and more characters. It's important that we see these tropes through their eyes and written from their perspectives. As the wonderful author Whitney Hill writes, old tropes hit differently when we have greater diversity in both protagonists and authors. For example, how is the chosen one trope different when it's not only about magic, but also about its intersection with a marginalized background and experiences? Telling diverse stories isn't enough. We need to have diverse authors writing them, accurately representing ourselves and our experiences to get greater range and mileage out of tropes. Now, I couldn't have said it better myself, and I will put a link down to some of Whitney Hill's books in the description. I also advise you to follow her on Instagram and Twitter because in addition to her wonderful books, she has a wealth of knowledge about the writing and publishing process for both indie and traditional authors alike. Let's get started. I'm first going to give an overview about what tropes are. I'll go into each of the tropes and provide some examples of these different tropes and some subtypes and discuss why these tropes are harmful. Before I get into that, please go ahead and subscribe to my channel. I'd really appreciate it. If you are somebody who is a writer, not just an author, but any kind of writer. If you're looking for tips on how to better your writing and you like hearing reviews on fantasy and horror books, TV shows, movies, and more, then you'll enjoy the content on my channel. So without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so before we actually talk more about tropes, I think it's important to get a baseline understanding of what a trope is in the first place and why we use them. A trope, as defined by dictionary.com, is a recurring theme or motif, as in literature or art, a convention or device that establishes a predictable or stereotypical representation of a character, setting, or scenario in creative work. And why do we use them? Tropes are one of the ways that readers can evaluate a writer's skill with language and storytelling. When a trope is used cleverly or subverted in an unexpected way, it showcases the writer's mastery of the genre. When used as a crutch, a trope demonstrates lazy writing and a lack of originality. Now, I think that last part is especially important when we're talking about tropes being used as a crutch. And these four are some tropes that have unfortunately been used as crutches in a lot of writing over the years across all mediums. So let's get into it, and the first trope I'm going to be talking about is the magical minority. So with the magical minority trope, this is essentially focusing on a minority character who ends up helping a white character, and that's all they do. They have no other desire or aim or whatever or point in the story beyond helping the white character fulfill their destiny or become less bigoted. As the definition from Tropepedia says, despite being marginalized, though, the magical minority person is always there to share their wisdom with their privileged friend, show him or her the way, teach him or her a lesson about tolerance if he or she happens to be a bigot, and solve all of his or her problems. Often, these are characters who have deep spiritual wisdom or specialized knowledge about something that the white protagonist is trying to do or overcome. Think Bagger Vance from The Legend of Bagger Vance, or Morgan Freeman in a lot of the movies that he's done, right? Like Bruce Almighty, Think John Coffey in The Green Mile, think Dick Halloran in The Shining, both movie and the book, and so on. These characters might not always have an inherent magical power, but a lot of times they do, as is the case with Bonnie Bennett from The Vampire Diaries. These are characters whose only goal and only purpose in the story is to help their white protagonists reach their full potential. Often, they have no backstory, no desires of their own, no desire to use their prowess, their intelligence, their magical powers to help their own people. Now, I gave you examples of John Coffey, Morgan Freeman, and the like, but some other examples include Oda Mae Brown from Ghost, Mr. Miyagi from Karate Kid, Tonto from The Lone Ranger, Pocahontas from Pocahontas. We can even say Abigail Mills from Sleepy Hollow because of the way that the second to last season of the show played out. This trope is so prevalent in a lot of media and a lot of cinema, and it's pretty fucking aggravating that it is prevalent. And that's due in part because of the fact that this is a deeply racist trope. It often depicts these characters as happy-go-lucky despite their circumstances, as in the case of Uncle Remus and Jim in Song of the South and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, respectively. It's often shown as these characters, like I mentioned, having no desire to help their own people out of their circumstances, but only looking to help the white protagonists achieve whatever it is they need to achieve, whether that's being less racist or, like I said, learning how to play the perfect game of golf. When this trope presents itself with an Asian character, often it is the Asian character helping the white protagonist with hand-to-hand combat. When it's present in an indigenous character, for example, it's often that this character is using their cultural practices or ancient practices to help them in some kind of mystical or magical way. This ends up having their own cultural practices exotified and positioned as something to be feared, rather than something to be respected and revered. That also extends to when the character is a Buddha practitioner or when they practice Santeria or any other kind of religion like that. It's just racist, it's tired, and by and large, it's written by and/or for white audiences. Additionally, these are characters who exist on the margins. They are people who are the token minority at a predominantly white institution or in a predominantly white town surrounded by mostly white people with mostly white friends, or they're people who live solitary lives where they're in the middle of the wilderness or in a countryside or something like that. And often they have a contentious relationship with people of the same race or religion because of their desire to help the white characters, as is the case for Pocahontas. In addition to the fact that this is a wildly racist trope, these characters are just not well written in the first place because they're not written as a fully realized character. They have no autonomy, they have no desire. We often don't even get a ton of backstory on these characters. We often are only told that they're totally happy to serve or to help the white protagonists and white people that are around them. They are often disposable. These characters are often killed off once they have done the things they are supposed to do by the story standards. Think Bubba from Forrest Gump or Abby Mills in Sleepy Hollow, which I'm still mad about how that went down, by the way. Sleepy Hollow fans, sound off in the comments. I'm sure we all feel the same way about how they did Abby. Or if it's a situation where the character is a series regular, right, like Bonnie, they tend to suffer more than their white counterparts. Think about Bonnie and all of the things that she went through and all of the people that she lost. Her grandmother, her mother, her father, her love interest, her own life, multiple times. She went through an immense amount of suffering compared to Elena, compared to Caroline, all the other characters that were series regulars. And yet, Bonnie was the one who was quite literally magical, coming through and saving all of their asses on the regular. As the take says, the magical minority actually stems from fake progressivism. and a surface attempt to create positive media representation of people of color. But given the realities of race in America, this trope is a white writer's fantasy. It soothes white guilt by providing white audiences with sympathetic protagonists to see themselves in. Now, some subgenres of the magical minority include the mammy character, the Uncle Tom, the sassy black best friend, the ethnic magician, and the token minority. All right, how to get some tea for the rest of these tropes. So moving on, the next trope that we're talking about is one I'm sure you have heard of, one you may have bought into or not, and that is the not like the other girls or the cool girl trope. Now, we have seen this trope in countless young adult, countless 90s and early aughts films, and essentially this trope follows a conventionally attractive woman, usually thin and usually white, whose interest in traditionally masculine things, i.e. sports or video games or cars, etc., or whose personality or whose disinterest in things that are traditionally seen as feminine, i.e. makeup, pink, having friendships with other women, gossiping, things like that, makes her different and thus much more desirable. Now, to quote a passage from the iconic Cool Girl monologue from Gone Girl, "Cool girls are above all hot and understanding. Cool girls never get angry. They only smile in a chagrined, loving manner and let their men do whatever they want. Go ahead, shit on me. I don't mind. I'm the cool girl." And also, to quote the song from One Direction, "You don't know you're beautiful, that's what makes you beautiful." Even though the not like the other girl must be conventionally attractive, she must not realize her own attractiveness. Now, some examples of this include Buffy from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Mary, who is quite literally the blueprint for a lot of the cool girl stereotype from There's Something About Mary, Vanessa from Deadpool, Elena Gilbert from The Vampire Diaries, Bella Swan from Twilight, Katniss from The Hunger Games, Kat Stratford from 10 Things I Hate About You, and more. So why is this trope harmful, in addition to it being sexist? As Alyssa Bristow for the Writing Cooperative writes, "In a patriarchal culture, women don't get to be quirky and well-rounded individuals. We're forced into pigeonholes. And when we look to real life for models for complex, well-rounded women, our culture insists that women who are interesting, powerful, complicated, messy, compelling are the exception and not the rule." This trope pits women against each other, and it is predicated on the fact that the not like the other girl is the complete antithesis of the other girls who participate in things that are seen as typically feminine. And because in a white patriarchal Christian society, femininity is often posited or positioned as less than, any partaking in things that are feminine is seen as vain, vacuous, ditzy, silly, and more. Think how Elena Gilbert is written and portrayed versus Caroline Forbes in The Vampire Diaries. It also again sends the message that these women who are the other women are not to be taken seriously. It often fashions the idea of a woman not knowing who she is or potentially having lower self-esteem as cool. Like what the One Direction song is saying, "You don't know you're beautiful, that's what makes you beautiful," right? We're talking Anastasia Steele in 50 Shades of Grey, who just consistently doesn't understand why men would be attracted to her, even though she's then conventionally attractive, all of that. And when we have a case of a character being billed as a feminist, like Kat in 10 Things I Hate About You, and when this character does the whole listening to indie music, wearing darker clothes, and not wearing makeup, and not wearing frilly things, and reading the feminine mystique, and her herself having a low viewpoint of societal beauty standards, things that are feminine, despite being herself conventionally attractive, and disliking all the things that her sister Bianca is, who is written and can be seen as very traditionally feminine, it again sends a message that to be feminist is to be like Kat Stratford and not necessarily like Bianca, even though part of feminism is the idea that women should be exactly how they wish to be, and that the feminine isn't less than. Now, when we also have a situation where the cool girl or not like the other girl is a supporting character, right, as in the case of the Black Widow, she is always somebody who is supportive. She's always somebody who's one of the guys. She's somebody who can kick ass but never outshines the men that she's surrounded with, or who's completely chill and completely supportive of the things that the men around her enjoy doing, right? Like Robin from How I Met Your Mother. Now, one subtype of the cool girl not like the other girls trope is the Manic Pixie Dream Girl, and this is somebody who takes on similar characteristics of the not like the other girl, cool girl, albeit with a slightly quirky direction, and ends up kind of taking on some of the mysticism of the magical minority, in that this woman doesn't necessarily have a defined backstory. She's not necessarily a defined character. Her only purpose / goal is to help the male protagonist realize his better nature, or come to grips with who he is, or become a better person overall. Now, once she does this, the Manic Pixie Dream Girl and this protagonist often break up, or she disappears. She's no longer in this person's life because her job is done. Her job is done. Alright, so our third trope that is toxic and needs to be thrown in the trash is a trope so pernicious, so pervasive, that it has its own article written about it by Healthline. That is the white savior trope. As defined by Shadow in movies, the white savior trope describes a narrative where a white person, usually the protagonist, fights either to save a non-white individual or group from an oppressive ruler or morally redeem that individual. And from Healthline, white savior complex, sometimes called white savior syndrome or white saviorism, refers to those who work from the assumption that they know best what BIPOC folks need. They believe it is their responsibility to support and uplift communities of color in their own country or somewhere else, because people of color lack the resources, willpower, and intelligence to do it themselves. Now, mind you, they're saying that that's what this trope and people who perform white saviorism often think. From the take, they are a strong-willed, optimistic, non-traditionalist who courageously risks being ostracized by their more prejudiced community in order to help a person of color. Now, the white savior is often found in period pieces. They are often found in situations where the movie or text centers on some aspect of race or racism. Some film examples include The Help, Dances with Wolves, Avatar, The Blind Side, Freedom Riders, and there are so many more. And why is this trope harmful? It's racist. It has its roots in European imperialism, when white Christian people thought it was their duty to save indigenous people and populations. It's fake progressivism. Similar to the magical minority, this trope is meant to assuage white guilt. It centers whiteness and white people and stories and tales that focus on the quest for equality that Black, Indigenous, and other people of color strive for. The white savior trope also falls in line with the idea that white people and white audiences are unable to relate to Black stories and to stories written by other marginalized groups unless they themselves are involved in the story or they themselves are centered. Even stories about race and racism, there's this idea that white people can't relate. Now, this is something that we see not just in race and racism, like period type pieces. There are a number of BIPOC authors who get lower ratings and reviews from white readers who consistently say that they couldn't relate, or the characters weren't relatable to them. And, you know, the coded message behind that is that they couldn't relate to these characters because they weren't white. And again, this is often in books written by BIPOC authors. As the take says, as well-intentioned as many of them may be, the sheer ubiquity of these narratives which are overwhelmingly created by white writers and directors and frequently recognized by awards, detracts from other stories grounded in Black perspectives and their firsthand experience of racism. Now, that quote is especially powerful because we see this even today in the wake of what happened to George Floyd and the protests that followed, when white readers overwhelmingly bought the book White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, who is a white woman, instead of investing in and reading anti-racism books written by Black authors like Ijeoma Oluo, Austin Channing Brown, and Ibram X. Kendi. Now, the final trope that needs to go into the garbage is the bury your gays trope. As defined by tvtropes.com, this trope is the presentation of deaths of LGBT characters where these characters are nominally able to be viewed as more expendable than their heterosexual counterparts. In this way, the death is treated as exceptional in its circumstances. In aggregate, queer characters are more likely to die than straight characters. Indeed, it may be because they seem to have less purpose compared to straight characters, or that the supposed natural conclusion of their story is an early death. Now, some examples of the bury your gays trope include Philadelphia, It, both the book and the film, with the death of Adrienne Mellon, Tara from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Lexa from The 100, the movie Brokeback Mountain, The Children's Hour, and I would argue even Scar from The Lion King, because we all know that Scar is queer-coded, and that's a story for another day. Now, why is this trope harmful? It only shows the suffering of LGBTQ+ people and not the full spectrum of their experiences. And it sends a message that queer people will always be rejected, abused, and always have to struggle to be accepted. And in some cases, like in the Danish Girl or Philadelphia, the queer characters aren't even the center of their own story. The straight cisgendered people in their lives are the ones who are centered in the story, and the stories are about how straight cisgendered people in their lives relate to or reject them. It also treats queer people as symbols and as expendable. And the deaths of these queer characters are often used for shock value or ways to move the plot forward, or to motivate these straight characters to stop being homophobic or to come in and seek justice for their fallen friend. Now, when we have a situation where the queer character is queer-coded, which, as a sidebar, queer coding is because of the Hays Code, which forbid a lot of things, especially explicitly writing queer characters, queerness was written into the subtext of movies and things like that. The Portrait of Dorian Gray, the movie Rope, things like that. And this extends to Disney movies. So the queer coding of LGBTQ characters as villains and then their subsequent death makes the statement that LGBTQ+ people are evil and amoral. And so when they die, it's seen as some form of justice. Isn't a villain, queer-coded or otherwise. They are martyrs whose life ends in tragedy, thus sending the message that to be queer is to lead an amoral life or to lead a life marked by tragedy, marked by violence, rejection, and sadness. And these tales became more prevalent, especially in the 1980s amidst the AIDS epidemic. Now, often these films show characters who aren't still fully realized, and we're only focusing on their death, like in the case of Philadelphia, or these characters in their own lives, as in the case of The Children's Hour, which is a movie featuring Shirley MacLaine and Audrey Hepburn. And these two women are roommates, they are teachers, and they are accused of having an affair together. And when Shirley MacLaine's character Martha realizes that she does in fact have romantic feelings for Karen and does in fact love her, she's racked with guilt over having ruined her life and ruined Karen's life, and thus ends up taking her own. As the take says, often these stories depict their deaths as a tragic sacrifice made before an uncaring world. Now, caveat to this is, I'm not saying that stories that talk about the AIDS epidemic or stories that discuss the challenges that queer people face are not important. And I'm not saying that these stories don't need to be told. What I am saying is the sheer breadth and sheer number of stories that are told and focus solely on the suffering of LGBTQ plus people at the hands of disease, at the hands of their community, at the hands of their family, and even to a certain extent at their own hands, definitely sends the message that to be queer is to live a life of tragedy, to live a life of violence, that it's dangerous and something that needs to be steered away from. All right, so those are the 4 tropes that I firmly believe are not helpful and need to be thrown into the garbage, and they are the magical minority trope, the not like the other girls / cool girl trope, the white savior trope, and the bury your gays trope. I definitely think that they are ones that are difficult, if not near impossible, to try to repurpose. Let me know what you think about these tropes in the comments below, if you agree that these should probably be avoided, or if you think that they can actually be used appropriately. I'd love to know your thoughts. If you liked this video, if you like this type of content, so writing advice and things like that, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. Otherwise, I hope you all have a great day, week, weekend, whatever. We are in November now, no longer in October, but I firmly believe that spooky season, spookiness, and the love of horror and monsters is all year round. So, I hope y'all have a good evening, and I'll talk to y'all later. Bye! I'm really excited. Oh, hey, wait. Spectrum. And you're looking for tips on how to better your writing, and you like just listening to somebody goofy talk. Oh, that's terrible. Oh, I almost hit my head. She went through an inordinate, say, Katerina against, what was her sister's name? Traditional small slice of the